Hello, BookTube. I want to do a little bit of catching up with some of the tags that I've just unpardonably let go. And one of the most interesting ones is the My Neck of the Woods tag that was created by by Kelly at Books I'm Not Reading. And that's all about where you come from. The first question is to tell everybody what your neck of the woods is, and then the second is to talk about a few authors, 3 or more, depends, it's loose, who come from that neck of the woods, and then the third is to find other people from other necks of the woods. And I love it because it's just a kind of nosy personal tag that I very much like on BookTube. The only problem is that for me, there's considerable scholarly disagreement about my neck of the woods. There are 4 or 5 different schools of interpretation as to what my neck of the woods is, and no scholarly consensus. So for now, sorry, I'm gonna keep one eye on the puppy. For now, we're gonna go with my neck of the woods being Boston, not Massachusetts, and not New England, but just Boston. And I want hello. I want to talk about 3 writers who were born in Boston, and we'll just take it at that. And I know you're thinking right now that you're going to hear all sorts of familiar names, and unfortunately, these are not familiar names. The first one is Dorothy Adlow, who worked for the dear old Boston Transcript. The Boston Evening Transcript is a newspaper I've actually mentioned on this channel before. I've written about it a lot. I would love to write the story of the Boston Evening Transcript, not just a few mentions on videos, but to write its actual institutional story. It's just I'm not sure you could do that anymore. I'm not sure the documents have survived. But one way or another, it was a rollicking, wonderful band of people, and boy, oh boy, was it an incubator for talent. And she was blindingly talented in criticism in my own field. She was an art critic. And she moved from the Boston Evening Transcript to the Christian Science Monitor, where she was the art critic in the staff, in the newsroom, for the better part of half a century. Just one column after another about exhibits, about artists. She had very open-minded, elastic, progressive views on art, and wrote about it tremendously engagingly. I don't know how many people, I'm sure she lost count of how many people wrote to her and said, I would not have considered myself able to think about art if it hadn't been for you. If it hadn't been for you showing me how to do that and showing me that anybody can do that. And that's a wonderful legacy. She was a wonderful, happy, smiling woman, and hid a lot of erudition behind a far more approachable tone in her reviews. Just a wonderful, wonderful writer. The next person I want to mention, not quite so wonderful, not quite so vivacious, but fascinating in her own way. Not everybody has to be nice, right? Her name was Molly Childers, and she was the wife of Erskine Childers, whose only claim to fame on BookTube might be that some of you will know that he wrote Riddle of the Sands. But they were both also deeply involved in the cause of Irish nationalism. To such an extent that I'd be willing to bet, I haven't had the heart to check, but I'd be willing to bet that that's all that Molly Childers will ever be remembered for, is her involvement in Irish nationalism and political causes, which meant a lot to her. But books meant more. She was crippled. She was bedridden for, I think, most of her early life, and even after that, she only got around laboriously on crutches, and she had the good fortune to live next door to the Boston Athenaeum, which is a private library here in Boston, old, beautiful, quite, at the time that she was a member, quite odd. You could, members had no limit to how many books they could take out. The library would send a boy over with your books. All you had to do was let them know that you wanted them. Members often left extensive notes on slips of paper inside books. that old collection, though, some people connected with the Athenaeum in the 1950s were urging that old ragtag body of books that were so personalized by generations of readers be maintained. Don't clean them up and de-access them. Maintain them. They are themselves a priceless literary history. But one way or another, she spent enormous amounts of time in the Athenaeum and read everything and wrote a lot, not just about politics, but also about lots of other things, including, you can say it with me at this point on this channel, lots and lots of book reviews. So I would hate it if her radical political beliefs overshadowed that, and yet I'll bet they do. I bet that even if Erskine Childers were to get a new biography, I'd be willing to bet that that biography would make no mention of her own literary endeavors, which is a terrible shame. And then the next person I want to mention, at least, possibly, you might have heard of. Her name is Norma Farber. She's a member in good standing, a founding member almost of one of Boston's great families, and she wrote a bunch of kids' books. She wrote volumes of poetry that were in their time praised very highly. I don't think the poetry dates very well, but her kids' books are delightful. Her children's books are delightful. She specialized in something that some of you may be familiar with Ogden Nash or Edward Lear. She specialized in nonsense writing, which you might think is easy, but it's actually incredibly hard to do. She was a very serious person, and she was playful in a way that only serious people can be. And her nonsense books are utterly delightful. And the way I know that they have magic in them is that you can take one of them and read it to children today, and it works just the same as it did when she was giving readings at the Boston Athenaeum, up in their fairy tale children's room, and having children all around her just bouncing up and down with happiness. That was a long time ago, and it still works. It still works. She wrote a book called As I Was Crossing Boston Common, that if you ever see it at a used bookstore, get it. You're going to love it, and it doesn't matter how old you are. I believe I've written about As I Was Crossing Boston Common. So if I have, I'll try and remember to leave a link down below. But Norma Farber wrote something or other for her whole life, and also kept up an enormous correspondence, snail mail, letter, correspondence. And I think her books are probably all out of print. I know that there's been no collected letters or anything like that, so she at least did make an impression on the literary world. And if you want to know more about these authors, then I suggest their books. For Dorothy Adlow, there's a big collection of her art writing that spans all the movements and all the decades and all the personalities that she knew. It's called The View from Me, and it's an amazing book. Probably not in print anymore, but it conveys all of her happy, endlessly inquisitive spirit towards the art world and the broader world as well. And Molly Childers, there's a collection of her political writings, and there's also a sort of a thin autobiographical sketch called Emerald Winters. That's just, it is mostly about politics, but it is chillingly good. just an enormous brain at work, and that's always thrilling to be in the company of an enormous brain. And for Norma Farber, there's her kids' books, of course, but there's also Something Farber, which is a big annotated biography of her and her literary world and her family and all of her literary connections. And it's a play on Something Further, which was the title of one of her volumes of poetry. And it's not the same thing as a collected letters or a big autobiography, but it still gives you a wonderful view, a wonderful sympathetic view of Norma Farber. And there's only one main problem with those three books, The View from Me, Emerald Winters, and Something Farber. And that's one that we've encountered on this channel before, which is that those books don't exist. Nor do anything like them. Norma Farber's children's books are out of print. No one's ever thought to collect her letters or anything like that. Molly Childers, I believe that her writing is entirely forgotten, in favor, overshadowed by her political activities. I don't think anyone even remembers that she was a writer, much less that she did it all the time. She wrote all the time. And Dorothy Adlow, who left by far the longest literary imprint of any of these three, and was intended for an audience, unlike a lot of the rest of what the others wrote. Dorothy Adlow has never been collected. No one's ever thought to write a biography of her. No one's ever thought to write even a brief memoir of her that was published. Her papers extend for, I don't even know, 15 feet in boxes here in Boston. No one's ever bothered to consult them. No one's ever bothered to pull those articles together from the bowels of the Christian Science Monitor and make a volume called The View from Me. No one's ever bothered to do that, even though she was absolutely instrumental in changing the landscape of art in America. And certainly she was instrumental in changing the landscape of art criticism in America. So you would think that all of these books would exist, but no, they don't. So that's my neck of the woods. My neck of the woods is Boston, which is planted neck deep from stem to stern with authors who did great works and had lively, lightning-quick literary careers for 60, 70 years and are now completely forgotten. Not just the renown of their names, but any literary history of them whatsoever. It's completely forgotten, even though it was once alive and funny and provocative and interesting. So that's my neck of the woods tag. And all it's left for me to do is tag people. I want to tag people from 3 different parts of the world. I want to tag Nashwa and Roz, of course, from A Journey Through Books, and Britta, who all have completely different necks of the woods. I don't know if all 3 of you have been tagged or not, but I will tag you down below. So there you go. That is the My Neck of the Woods tag and my attempt to dig myself out of a little hole of tags that I've been in. But I'll wrap this up for now, and I'll see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.